Chapter 7 talks about the lymphatic system and immunity. And we will look through a brief overview of the chapter in this audio lecture. Alright, so first topic is what are microbes? Microbes are microscopic, very small particles that include bacteria, viruses, prions, other such as fungus, parasites. Viroids are material that infect plants. And so all of these are going to potentially cause disease, whether it's in humans, whether it's in a plant, regardless of where it is. If the microbe causes disease, it's called a pathogen. So what are bacteria? Bacteria are single-celled organisms. They almost all have a cell wall, which you see in the diagram, and this is going to be protective in nature, and that cell wall therefore is going to be foreign to our bodies because our cells do not have a cell wall. They are very abundant in and on our bodies. Bacteria cells actually outnumber our human cells, and it's actually quite impressive to think about that. Now, moving on to viruses. All right, viruses recognize the virus container, what we call the capsid. Some viruses have a capsid as well as an envelope, and that's just its packaging. So viruses are very small, much smaller than bacteria, and there are some viruses that actually infect bacteria, but these are not living. Right? They have to get inside of a cell in order to do damage. It gets into the cell and hijacks all of the cellular machinery and can then do its thing. They, in addition to having to get inside of a cell, they also have to get into a specific cell. And that means that hepatitis viruses, they don't infect the brain. They don't infect the throat. They infect the liver. Cold viruses, they get inside of us. They don't do damage to our heart. They do damage to our throat, to our nasal cavity. And it's there that they cause the problems. They don't cause problems anywhere else because they don't get into those cells. We talked about infectious mononucleosis. That's caused by Epstein-Barr virus, right? That virus infects B cells, no other cells, just B cells. So they're very specific. And they can't be killed because they're not alive, but they can be broken down into pieces or destroyed. So all viruses have an outer coat, and then they have some form of nucleic acid. Viruses can be either RNA viruses or DNA viruses. And we'll talk about RNA and DNA later in a few weeks, but that's what they are. They are a protein coat, and they are a nucleic acid. And I mentioned that some do have envelopes. So the purpose of our immune system is to figure out what isn't right and to kill it. And this is going to be done through lymphocytes. The lymphocytes are going to recognize and destroy pathogens. And the lymphocytes are stored in lymphatic organs. And they travel in the blood and in the lymph, basically surveying and looking out for these invaders. The lymphatic system collects fluid, transports fat and immune cells, all of these different guys back into the proper vasculature so that they can be cleared and screened and taken out of the body. So the lymphatic system includes the lacteals, the lymph nodes, the spleen, the bone marrow, and the thymus. All of these are very important, and they are in areas that allow for the greatest area of collection and screening. So you see the different areas of lymph nodes. You have them in your armpits, you have them in your groin, you have them in the neck. And those are just major places, basically collection areas. So the lymph nodes in your armpits are going to collect lymph or material from the lymph that has come out of your arms. The groin can be lymph that's coming from the legs and even the trunk of the body. All right, then you have the spleen, the thymus, the bone marrow, the tonsils. Those are going to be the organs within the lymphatic system. So it is a system of one-way vessels collecting liquid to return to the blood, and in that way it helps the system fight pathogens. So our modes of protection, right, very basic. We have barriers, we have the inflammatory response, and then we have cell-mediated immunity. The first line of defense are the barriers. All right, the barriers can be physical barriers, skin, tears, saliva, urine. The urine physically flushes microbes out of the urinary tract system. Tears flush microbes out of the eye. Saliva flushes it continuously out of our mouth down into our stomach. In the stomach there is a low pH, and that can kill a lot of microorganisms. Whereas if we didn't have saliva and constantly moving material out of our mouth, whether that just food, just saliva, our mouth is a dirty place. It has a lot of bacteria in it, and if we didn't continually wash some of that bacteria out, it would continue to replicate into high numbers. All right, there are mucous membranes that line the respiratory, the digestive, reproductive, and urinary tracts. That has cells that produce mucus. The mucus is sticky, and it helps to grab hold of bacteria and organisms and move it out. All right, and there's also the resident bacteria, the normal flora, the organisms that naturally inhabit our skin, in our mouth, in our digestive tract. And those guys simply inhibit other organisms from coming into our body and taking hold, because the normal flora eat up the nutrients, they take up all the space, and so it's hard for a pathogen to come in and actually find a place where it can replicate and cause problems. All right, then there are chemical barriers. We have oil from our oil glands. There is a chemical called lysozyme that targets the cell wall of bacteria. That is from saliva, tears, and our sweat. And then there's the acidic pH of our stomach, and then the vagina of women. Second line of defense is going to be the inflammatory response. With inflammation, you have some sort of injury that allows for microbes to get into the cells or into the tissue, and then particular cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, gobble up the organism, and that causes the macrophages, the dendritic cells, to produce cytokines. These are chemicals that initiate the inflammatory response. All right, the inflammatory response involves neutrophils and monocytes coming into the tissue, into the damaged area through the blood. Those will also act to phagocytize, gobble up any additional pathogens. And then there's blood clotting. All right, but the hallmark of inflammation is redness, heat, swelling, and then pain. Pain because of that swelling from increased fluid, and so it simply puts pressure on the nerves that are in that area. All right, there's a chemical called histamine. This causes capillaries to open and allows the white blood cells to escape out of the vasculature like you see here. Histamine is also a key chemical within allergic responses. So, with the increased blood flow, you have that warmth. The warmth itself can actually inhibit some pathogens, brings more white blood cells, and allows our immune system to simply take care of the problem. Right, short-lived, but more white blood cells can be recruited, And it's important to note that inflammation is very good when it's short-lived, when it's doing what it's supposed to. However, you can have chronic inflammation that actually doesn't have any purpose, and then it just causes problems. Alright, the third line of defense is called cell-mediated immunity. And the uses, or it uses B cells and T cells. Those are the major players. And I don't think this might play. Alright, just an overview of the immune response, looking at antibodies, plasma cells. But the important thing about the third line of defense is to note that it is specific. Alright, it is going to be specific for a particular type of invader. A T cell is not going to target a staph organism if it was supposed to, if it's been programmed to target E. coli. So it's very specific, and with the third line of defense, your body actually has to see an organism first before it can respond. Alright, so summary of the B cells and the T cells. This is just an important table to look at. The B cells produce plasma cells and memory cells. Those are the function of the B cell in general. The plasma cell produces antibodies, which we'll look at in the next couple of slides. And then memory cells, they're memory. They have memory for what they just saw, whether that be E. coli or staph. And so these guys will simply hang out, and if that same intruder comes back, they are ready to produce more cells in the future to allow for more antibodies to be produced. T cells. T cells have three different types of T cells. There is the cytotoxic T cells, so they're toxic. They're going to kill virus-infected cells. They're going to kill cancer cells. There's the helper T cells. Those regulate immunity. And then there's memory T cells. They just hang out, ready to come back fighting the next time they see the same organism. Alright, antibodies are these Y-shaped proteins. Alright, just like this, there's a lot of material or detail we can talk about with antibodies, but what I want you to know is that it is protein. It is shaped like a Y, and it's going to bind specifically to an antigen. This is going to be part of a virus, part of a bacteria cell. And it's going to be very specific to that one piece of bacteria cell. But this one antibody can bind to two of those antigens because it has two tips. Alright, and so you can see here, this antibody binds to the triangle, but not the square or this rounded piece. This antibody binds to the rounded end piece here, and it's binding twice. And so the bacteria cell that you see here has a variety of different antigens. It's just the molecular part of that antibody binds to. Alright, just briefly look over this. B cells use antibodies to protect the cell and later. Here you have the B cell, you have expansion, you have the memory B cells over here, you have plasma cells here. Those plasma cells secrete the antibody just to hang out in the blood. Alright, there's 5 classes of antibodies. Important to note that IgG can cross the placenta, so in utero an infant can start developing its immune system because of the mom. But all of these are going to be similar in nature in terms of being made of protein and having that Y shape. And third line of defense, looking at the T cells, again, similar pictures before. You have the T cells up here. They go through their maturation, and you have a cytotoxic T cell that can kill. You have memory T cells, and doesn't show the helper T cell here, but this is really what the helper T cell is. It's going to produce cytokines that can basically help the immune system figure out what it's supposed to do. Like the B cell, the T cell has a unique receptor, and it recognizes one particular antigen. the three different types of B cell or T cells, and you have memory T cells. And that will be the end of